Madame.
High Commissioner for Human Rights, President of the State Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of international organizations, members of the Great Council, former President of the Swiss Confederation, members of the press, dear colleagues, students, guests, and friends. On the 10th of December 1948, at the end of the Second World War, the 58 member states of the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Paris in the Palais de Chaillot. 70 years later on, human rights remain more than ever at the center of the challenges which our society must rise to. These rights are threatened by ceaseless attacks against multilateralism and the erosion of values and standards of equality and human dignity. Aware of these challenges and the role of training and research that the university must take part in, and given Geneva's important place in the field of human rights, our university has given a central place to human rights in its academic activities and in its relations with the city. Over the last years, we've done this by holding a Human Rights Week, and this is the 6th year that we have done this. And a MOOC on international protection of human rights has also been held. We also have a Human Rights Gender and Alterity Summer School and ongoing training on discrimination, health, and human rights in the Economics and Management faculty in the Business and Human Rights School. Health, human rights, children's rights. It's undeniable that our training and research is highly imbibed with human rights. Human rights are also dealt with from a variety of perspectives. This is one of the assets of our institution, one of the most precious assets that we have, and we have to preserve this in order to rise to these societal challenges. Our commitments are many and important. We need to come up with new solutions, and the university, I'm convinced of this, has a key role to play in seeking collective, multidisciplinary, and obviously sustainable solutions to ensure that human rights will be respected in our society, which is more complex, global, and digital. I would simply like to give you 3 examples to illustrate this determination to find innovative solutions. InZone. For the last 10 years, InZone has offered access to higher teaching, higher training in war zones and refugee camps. Thus, men and women can gain education, skills, and use these to be actors rather than spectators of their condition, and in doing so, preserve their dignity and freedom. Terre des Hommes. Our university and the Foundation Terre des Hommes have just signed an agreement to develop a joint project using artificial intelligence to predict and monitor epidemics and child's health problems, thus improving their fundamental right to health. A wonderful example of collaboration between academics, NGOs, and international organizations, and how this can give rise to innovative and transversal solutions. We're aware of the very important role that the new generation of business people are going to play to promote values and human rights in their working environment, and we are currently working on setting up a Human Rights Center, which will begin an academic interface, a reference for human rights friendly management. We want to make the best of all our assets that Geneva has, its humanist tradition, its position as an international city on a human scale. What better can we hope for in an academic international city which hosts one of the only multi-dimensional universities in Geneva? A space for dialogue, for seeking solutions. We test solutions, we propose and submit new solutions. The university is committed to a better world. The Confederation is and the university are very pleased to welcome Madame Bachelet this evening. Our Human Rights Week began yesterday, and the program is very varied and diverse, including the theme, Freedom and Rights in the Digital Era. We're working with associations of students, the High Commissioner for Refugees, theater representatives with a play by Mr. Ziegler. There will be mornings with students. And now I would like to thank very warmly all of the partners who have made these events possible. The Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, the Canton of Geneva, represented by its president, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the Academy for Human Rights. Human rights will also be in the place of honor next year because we'll be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In 2019, the city and Canton of Geneva, the Office of the High Commissioner, and other partners will be involved in events in Geneva, City of the Rights of the Child. Thank you very much for your attention. I would now like to give the floor to the President of the State Council of Geneva, Mr. Antonio Hodgers. Thank you very much.
Madame
High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, Rector, ladies and gentlemen.
Je suis très honoré.
The Geneva State Council and myself are very honored to open this public evening. Human rights are a subject which carry us along on a wave of hope for a better world, but I would give a lot to see the enthusiasm that we had in Vienna at the conference in 1993. The After-War Convention of 1948 was obviously well known in 1993. I was finishing my studies in international relations at the university, and the conference was the first conference after the Cold War, with the hope that the end of the two-block system would give human rights a greater place in the world, that multilateralism would become the rule and not the exception, and that we would come into the golden age of human rights. But we know what happened. What happened was the Rwandan genocide, the Balkan War, the 11th of September 2001, in reference to the 11th of September 1973, the jihadic wars, the war against the axis of evil, led by President George W. Bush, and the transgressing of the legal framework, often by superpowers. What also happened was the war in Syria, which is still very topical, and the collective helplessness to do anything about this horror. The blind massacre of terrorists, mass surveillance of citizens by states with the blessing of the people, the refusal to accept refugees, the rise of nationalism, and finally, the desire to close in on themselves by many states. Ladies and gentlemen, we must say that the hope we had at the end of the Cold War, at the end of that 11th of September, has not materialized as we had hoped. Progress has been made, but certainly not as much progress as we would have liked. And perhaps this observation should lead us to rethink things. It's important to declare human rights, but applying them, enforcing them is even better. There's often a gap, a big gap between the texts and the reality in the field. And it's our job as local government officials to make these human rights tangible, to make them concrete. The idea of human rights has greatly evolved since the first declaration, that of the French Revolution, based on prescriptive law, and citizens and men with a small m. But today I'd like to mention two subjects which are very important currently in the world: gender equality and the place of sexual minorities. Gender identity is a perfect example of the gap we have between a declared standard, which is enshrined in all our constitutions and laws, and reality. Since the 6th of November, women have been working free of charge, with no salary, until the end of the year. They have reached the end of the salary they would they earn less than that is less than men's, 40% less. 70% of women
Rien qu'en Suisse,
have been victims of violence. Domestic violence kills one person every 2 weeks.
deuxièmement, la place des minorités.
The place of sexual minorities now. There have been advances in the official recognition of marriages and partnerships, but today sexual minorities are strongly attacked in many countries, homophobic attacks. We heard this recently in the Brazilian presidential campaign, and more generally, in a great many countries. They are in physical danger, they are in danger of discrimination, and at the very least, they are discriminated against in the employment marketplace and in society. This is a reality in Europe as well as elsewhere. Homophobic acts are common in the newspapers. The huge job that we have to do to change this will require institutions that respect human rights, starting with the state. It will also require protecting human rights defenders. Madame Bachelet, you were in Paris 2 weeks ago for the first week on human rights defenders. These men and women who champion human rights and fight all forms of discrimination are bringing fundamental rights forward on the ground, and they deserve all of our appreciation. Civil society is responsible for denouncing and changing the situation, and the State Council salutes the work done by a number of organizations here in Geneva and elsewhere in the world, who often put themselves in danger to fight for human rights. Madame Bachelet, welcome to Geneva. Our canton is extremely proud to have such an important figure as you with us. Your background is an exceptional one. Your determination, your background and your life experience is exceptional. And I am very excited to listen to your speech now. Your life is an example of resilience. Micheline Calmiret is going to talk about this, and I thank her for launching the initiative of the Week of Human Rights here at the University, also co-sponsored by the Global Studies Institute. I would like to thank all those who took part in carrying out this program year after year, and I'm delighted to be with you for this Human Rights Week.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President of State Council. Before I give the floor to Micheline Calmiret, I'd like to mention the strong linkages between Geneva and Madame Bachelet. In May 1977, Alexis Jacquard disappeared on his travels to Argentina. At the time, many students, I was one of the colleagues of Alexis Jacquard, we came together, and I'd like to thank Madame Alinel, professor at our university, who also mobilized people so that we could dedicate an auditorium to the memory of Alexis Jacquard. And our connection with you, Madame Bachelet, is that the widow of Alexis was your co-worker when you were in your country. Micheline Calmire is now going to take the floor, and she will introduce you more formally. Thank you.
Excellent.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Madame Bachelet, we know each other. As President of the Confederation in 2007, I received you as part of your official state visit to Geneva and in Bern. And at that time, I underlined our common will to ensure protection and enjoyment of human rights in the world. This was a premonition as far as you were concerned, because here you are, High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights. Congratulations, Madam.
The University
of Geneva is very honored and touched that you have agreed to speak publicly for one of the first times since you took on your functions. Here at the Université, a place of history, teaching, and research, founded in 1559 by Jean Calvin, and now very much part of the fabric of our city. On behalf of all those here in the room this evening, I'm very happy to greet you and thank you for taking part in the Human Rights Week, which, as you've heard, is being held for the 6th year. The topic that we want to concentrate on this evening, and through other debates, a high-level symposium and a major public conference, is human rights in the digital era. Social media and internet are everywhere today, and their effects on private life raise a lot of challenges. Recently, a man whose son committed suicide after playing a game online sued WhatsApp, YouTube, and the French government for endangering the life of his son. And this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about when we talk about respecting human rights. We're talking about not putting others in danger. We're talking about psychological and physical abuse, incitement to hate and violence, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance. Madam, as a political prisoner, you personally felt the effects of the torture of the dictatorship. You have been a refugee, you have been a doctor, you have cared for people. Twice you have been president of your country. You're a great lady, and you're going to have a decisive influence on human rights policy. And human rights today are stood in very good stead because of this. Ladies and gentlemen, major efforts have been made over the last 20 years with the implementation of mechanisms to judge and punish the perpetrators of human rights violations. The United Nations High Commissioner, the Council, the Human Rights Council with its periodic review and its competent jurisdiction, the International Criminal Court, the European Court of Human Rights, all exist. But what we see is that, unfortunately, the existence of legal obligations does not necessarily make them mean that they're observed. 70 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on the 10th of December 1948, the enjoyment of these rights in the world are very erratic. Wars, armed conflicts, natural disasters, technological disasters, environmental disasters, all of these are increasing. The regularity and gravity of these affect many people. Fighting now takes place in urban areas. Fewer soldiers die, but many more civilians are dying. And over the last decade, massive violations of human rights have taken place. Ladies and gentlemen, today we see these rights being weakened on several fronts. The non-observance of some governments of fundamental rights with administrative detentions means that we need to apply that a double standard is being applied, with fingers being pointed by those who violate these rights. And what can we say about the restrictive migration policies used by the most developed countries? These are contributing to widening the gap between those who benefit from globalization and those who suffer from it. Some people are saying that the universality of human rights, the freedom of expression, should not stand. Your task is a big one. We are all here to wish you courage, perseverance, and many and long successes. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, you have to forgive me, I have to speak in English because my French n'est pas très bon. Huh? But if you invite me in my last year here, I will do it in French because I'm studying French again. Well, Mr. President of the University, Monsieur le Recteur, Excellencies, members of this university, students, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good evening. I am delighted to be part of this wonderful week of events, of seeking answers to some of the questions that will define our times. The program on this Human Rights Week lays out a number of topics that the entire human rights community will need to grapple with as a new digital landscape comes into sharper focus around us. But before going into digital, because I thought, what should I speak about? There will be young people there. And you know, there has been sort of different kinds of human rights. I mean, they're all universal. The Universal Declaration explains all of them. But usually people, and my office have been focused more on political and civil rights, but of course also on economic, social, and cultural rights. But now, in the last years, and appear what so many people call third generation of human rights, and it's the human rights related to environment, to digital, and to cyberspace. But of course, when we look at, we're celebrating now with this week and many other celebrations, the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And sometimes when you see those many conflicts that are around the world, so many violations of human rights in many places of the world, or lack of the same kind of opportunities and rights for women to men or the LGBTI community, or, for example, the Roma community, or in some Latin America, for example, Afro-descendant, or people living with HIV, etc., we know that there are still many issues and challenges. And we need to continue progressing on expanding human rights. But it's also not true that 70 years ago, women could vote only on a couple of countries. Women couldn't be elected, and there was, we had millions and millions of people who died because of hunger, because of giving birth. But still we have those. We have this terrible challenge between all problems of access to human rights, like the right to food, the right to health, the right to education, the freedom of expression, freedom of association or participation, etc., and we need to continue working very strongly on that. Yesterday in the International Gender Champion meeting, we were seeing that every month 1 million women between under 18 years become child rights. Or 1 million women before 18 years, they give birth, and 4,000 die giving birth. So we still have, if I may say, the problems of lack of development and lack of the possibility of ensuring people's rights. But we also have these new challenges. And these new challenges are very important for young people, for example. And in that sense, it's the challenges of climate change and environmental rights, because if we don't not able to tackle climate change, all human rights are going to be in great trouble. And the same happens with the opportunities and obstacles on this new era of the new digital landscape. And we can ask ourselves, can freedom of expression, information, thought and belief survive in an era when 360-degree surveillance by corporations and state is possible? Do we need new tools to ensure that machine-driven processes support human equality and dignity, and not the other way around? Does digital technology offer us fresh hope for the realization of human rights, or is it a game over? I'm not going to pretend there are easy answers. Everyone here is aware of the immense benefits human rights of the indigenous people is also a very important people. No, eso no es cierto, pero no vamos a discutir porque estamos en otra actividad ahora. No. No, eso no es cierto. Sorry, that's not true, what she's saying. And in Chile, we have an independent judiciary system. And we're going to fight always for independent judiciary system because we don't want arbitrary legal systems. It's independent. And sometimes the decision they made, I didn't like it. But I respect it because it's different power. That's not true. Sorry to tell you, that's not true. But if you want to speak about it, we can do it outside because now we have to respect the activity we're doing now. So we were mentioning about if digital technology could offer us fresh hope or if it's not. But I have to tell you, I'm not going to pretend there are easy answers. As in many other issues, there are not easy answers. As when you're in a government, you have to make decisions that are not easy. And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. Sometimes, for example, in the relation with the economy and the environment. How much you do in the environment, and because the economic sector pressed, so you won't do some environmental issues, but you need to make decisions. And that's in this case, it's also, they're not easy answers. And everyone, I think, is aware that the digital era could bring immense benefits in every area of life. And human rights work is no exception. Social media and tools such as encrypted communications help to connect and grow movements of human rights defenders. Human rights officers can gather information from social media sources. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of commissions of inquiry in Syria, in Yemen, in many places where there's huge conflicts. And of course, we don't have access to them. They don't permit human rights missions to go inside. So we have information from a remote, from a country that is close by, or from social media, digital information, and relation with people that are on the ground. So as I told you, you can gather a lot of information. You can enhance and supplement human rights investigation by using satellite imagery and encrypted communications to ensure better monitoring, investigation, and analysis. And a wide range of applications have been developed to assist investigations to verify that the information that gathered is genuine and accurate. Many of these tools help to preserve, store, and transmit key material to secure data stores for possible use in investigating and prosecuting the perpetrators of human rights violations. Other digital tools help investigators identify patterns within their data that can be matched with other open source information sets. So this kind of work has helped to find out what happened, for example, to missing persons, has helped identify the victims in mass killings or in mass rapes, and has provided information about patterns of torture or other violations in specific locations attributable to specific military units or even to specific individuals. I don't know if you saw a documentary made in Cameroon in the Anglophone zone where women and children were killed, and through satellite it was possible, I mean there was a video who appeared that somebody of the military unit took of the killings, and then somebody put it online, and then through satellite it could be seen the village where it was, the unit that it was, and people could identify, and they have been brought to justice. Or other example that I can give in Kosovo or in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the International Commission on Missing Persons has stored forensic details from human remains and matched them to family members of missing persons to help identify the missing and reconstruct relevant crime scenes and timelines. Regarding Syria, several processes are currently underway to bridge the gap between human rights fact-finding and eventual criminal justice proceeding by gathering and cross-check data for disappearances and other violations. So their results will be very important, valuable to the families of the missing, in some cases to the victims themselves, and for the future work of prosecutors, trust commissions, and other types of accountability mechanisms, or ICC, for example. My office works with groups like the Human Rights Investigation Lab at the University of California, Berkeley, which helps analyze vast amounts of open source material in Myanmar and Syria. The lab has also initiated the process to draw up guidelines for open source investigations with a view to strengthening the quality of evidence gathered online so that it can be useful not only for human rights investigations, but also for criminal prosecutions, including, as I just mentioned, the International Criminal Court. Digital tools can also help us with early warning. Spikes of hate speech and other online indicators of rising tensions can constitute a significant alert to impending violence. By monitoring this phenomena and acting quickly, we can hope to prevent violence. And many of the cases that we see in Norway and other places where I would say, terrible attacks were done, you could see that before those attacks, these people were online, were writing things, and also in the US, the last California bar and others, that those people were already online, sending hate speech messages, or the synagogue was attacked also. So if you can have a good track on them, you could eventually prevent violence. And the contributions of digital systems to our work don't stop there. New data streams have been used to track and interrupt human trafficking and exploitation, and have pointed to elements suggestive of modern slavery in business supply chains. Again, human rights workers are not just using digital tools to detect violations. We're also employing that knowledge to prevent further violations. So to this extent, and in many more ways, digital tools are our friends and allies in upholding people's rights. But it's also more and more evident that there is a dark aspect of the digital landscape. The internet is increasingly a space of threat for human rights defenders. People are increasingly attacked or abused by private actors, purely because of their activities online in support of human rights. And this is particularly the case of women, who suffer disproportionately from abusive trolling campaigns, which also expose them to physical attacks in the real world. In a study by the Interparliamentarian Union, in 45 European countries, 47% of women members of parliament said they had been targeted on social media with threats of death, rape, or violence. Governments in every region are also using digital surveillance tools to track down and target human rights offenders and people perceived as critics, including lawyers, journalists, activists on land rights or environment, and people who support equality for members of the LGBTI community. In many cases, this use of digital technologies for massive and wide-ranging surveillance is of a scale and nature that clearly contravenes the right to privacy as well as other rights. As the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression has regularly reported, digital technologies, including malware and spyware, also offer governments unprecedented capacity to interfere with the rights of freedom of opinion and expression. A range of surveillance, online monitoring, and data collection measures, such as browsing history, purchase history, search history, location data, financial data, health data, and so on, feed into massive banks of data on every woman, man, and child. And I don't mean everyone perceived to be a critic or an activist, or even every internet user, but I would say quite simply, every one of us. These data banks may include detailed portraits of our opinions, the nature of our relationships, our social background, medical information, financial situation, and so on. They can be sifted, processed, and evaluated by digital processes for a whole range of reasons, without accountability, without adequate supervision of the outcomes, even without us knowing that this is happening or that the data banks exist. Already today, from so-called predictive police, work to criminal sentences, medicine, finance, and key aspects of social protection. Machine-driven processes are making forecasts about people's behavior and producing decisions with enormous impact on their lives. How safe are these outcomes? Not very. The systems are only as good as the data put in, and that data itself is often flawed. In many cases, artificial intelligence-based predictions appear arbitrary or unjust, in addition to exacerbating the systemic discrimination embedded in society. So these outcomes are not inevitable, but they are already occurring, and their incidence and severity will grow unless we act. Is there proper oversight or adequate transparency regarding this use of big data? There is not. The use of artificial intelligence and big data also raise new and essential questions about responsibility. Although the state is always the primary actor in upholding human rights, in this case, private companies are responsible for the design and manufacture of tools which collect data and conduct surveillance, as well as the maintenance and ownership of the servers where this information is stored. And I will return to this point about the key role of the private sector in a moment, but it's worth noting here. Even more fundamentally, are the purposes of these systems benign? In some countries, vast amounts of data are being collected through surveillance, and they are used to determine a personal score employed in granting or denying people's access to opportunities and services. So this could resemble the use of credit history in other settings. But will it stop there? We've seen globally that data, once collected, has almost a life of its own. It can be used for a multiplicity of purposes that go far beyond the original or state purpose. And this interplay between artificial intelligence and the buildup of data about our personality or our choices goes one step further when it is used by private or public actors to manipulate our thoughts and change our voices, our choices. And I'm not talking about science fiction. Whether in the United States presidential election, the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom, or the recent elections in Brazil and Kenya, where fake polls and other disinformation were widely shared, we are seeing increasing reports of the use of bots and disinformation campaigns on social media to influence the opinions and choices of individual voters. Maybe you think this doesn't apply to us. We're too clever to be affected by a bunch of bots. But I'm not so sure. It appears the internet is increasingly becoming an arena for sometimes very sophisticated forces for propaganda, whether by movements of violent extremism or by private actors or even state authorities for political purposes. In such a context, can there be any doubt that our freedom to think, to believe, to express ideas, to make our own choices and live as we wish is under threat? If our thoughts, our ideas, and our relationship can be predicted by digital tools and even altered by the action of digital programs, then this poses some very challenging and fundamental questions about our future. More accurately, these are questions about your future, the young people. The young people here, you are the largest generation of young people the world has ever seen, are coming of age at a crucial turning point for humanity. Over the course of the next 12 years, the international community has the capacity to end extreme poverty and hunger, ensure more broader and more inclusive development, and set the planet on a course of a greater peace, greater justice, and far less harm. But if we are to fulfill the detailed plan laid out by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and create a more peaceful, sustainable, fair, and prosperous world for all, we need to uphold human rights across the board, including in the digital landscape. Is there a map that can guide us as we explore the frontiers of this new space and evaluate the unforeseen consequences of digital systems in almost every other domain of human endeavor, we have a compass through uncertainty. Deeply rooted principles can guide us as we evaluate and seek to mitigate and perhaps govern the impact of these unknowns. In a global world, we need global solutions. Since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted 70 years ago, a solid framework of international human rights laws and institutions has been built up to secure the dignity and rights of all people. International and regional institutions, backed by binding treaties, scrutinize the human rights practice of states and other key actors. Their approach is inherently cross-boundary, and they establish and operate widely accepted processes to guide policies and laws. The human rights approach brings into focus aspects that may not otherwise be visible, including the disproportionate impact of policies on specific groups, for example, in terms of deepening discrimination and inequalities, or in terms of the right to privacy or the right to freedom of expression. Particularly relevant to today's digital issues, human rights institutions have built up a tremendous body of experience to help governments ensure that the private sector acts responsibly in upholding rights and in providing redress for wrongs caused by their products or services. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights provide an authority global standard for addressing the human rights impact of business activity, and they should be applied with determination to the development, deployment, and operation of digital systems. They make it clear that governments must take appropriate steps to prevent, investigate, punish, and redress human rights abuses caused by the private sector. Excellent examples of guidance have been already developed for specific sectors, such as the Global Network Initiative Principles and Guidelines, the Telecommunication Industry Dialogue, and the European Union's Information and Communication Technology Sector Guidance. This will need to be further refined, and new guidance tools will be needed for other fields, from the health sector to finance, manufacturers of robots, autonomous cars, and other artificial intelligence sectors. The Rabat Plan of Action, which considers the distinction between freedom of expression and incitement to hatred, also contains threshold tests and recommendations, which are extremely relevant to social media and many other aspects of the digital universe. I believe this precision, expertise, transnational scope, and solid legal grounding are key elements we will need to count on as we walk more deeply into the digital landscape. In other words, one of the great tasks for the human rights community in the next few years will be to ensure the continued application of human rights in the way in which states operate in the digital age and in the ways in which they regulate the activities of companies in the digital space. The law is a clear and precise instrument, and when we face uncertainty and potential threats, clarity based on universally accepted principles is what is needed. The framework of international human rights law and institutions define duties and responsibilities and can contribute strong, meaningful guidance to complement what may be subjective ethical considerations. It also provides a well-developed architecture of processes for convening, deliberating, drawing up, and even enforcing norms. Therefore, we need to work together. Human rights lawyers, computer scientists, and engineers, representatives of businesses and governmental and intergovernmental bodies, to develop human rights impact assessment methodologies and other systems for analysis and guidance, which can address the specific requirement of digital system. Today, there is an enormous gap between this community. We need to open up our communication and make it clear on all sides of human rights law is deeply relevant to the digital world, while the evolution of the digital world is profoundly important to human rights. Above all, the duty to protect human rights needs to be an explicit priority for all stakeholders, states, developers, scientists, investors, business, and of course, the society. And it needs to be an explicit priority for you. We need to be able to count on the innovative and connective power of young people. we can make this urgent and evident need for more principled norms in the digital landscape an opportunity to empower young people to contribute to hammering out real solutions. All too often, young people are excluded from decision-making. They're not even invited to the table. The topics that we are discussing here clearly need your voices and your help. So I urge you to stand up for human rights and get involved in advocating responsible, human rights-based solutions to the challenges of this new era. And now I look forward to hearing your voices and your ideas. Thank you very much.
If it works. I think it... Ça marche? Oui.
Is the microphone working? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen.
Bachelet, for giving us your message. But now young people are invited to the table. Et nous avons deux étudiants de l'Université.
Two students from the University of Geneva and two pupils from André Chavin Secondary School. We'd now like to ask Madame Bachelet some questions. Let us start with Nouria Castin. Nouria is a third-year pupil at André Chavin Secondary School. She's specializing in economics and law. Nouria?
So my name is Nouria. I'm really happy to be here, and I would like to ask you one question. In fact, much has been said about the situation of women following the Weinstein case in particular. As a woman of the head of the Human Rights Council, will you be particularly attentive to the issues? To this issue? I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Nouria, for that question. Well, first of all, I'm not the head of the Human Rights Council, because the Human Rights, no, just to inform you, because the Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body. It's formed by 47 member states. I'm the head of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. That is, it's part of the UN system, and it's an independent office, if I may say. So that independence means that we have a mandate, and we have to be the voice of the voiceless, but we also have to engage governments in doing what they have to do. And also, we have to give technical assistance and capacity building so they can really do the right things. But let me go to your question. Well, for me, women's rights is a long life story. I've always been involved on those issues. And of course, when the Me Too movement appeared, we all also supported very strongly. And we thought there was this very important, courageous woman who, after so many years, many times, would denounce, and that would permit that appear everywhere. And you know, let me tell you something. In my country, when this happened, young women, but also, good thing, young boys, went out to the streets, and they started saying that they will not accept anymore harassment at the universities. Sexual harassment by teachers or by classmates. And many universities realized they didn't have a protocol how to deal with these issues when there were allegations. And so girls were there on the streets, even at schools. I'm not giving any ideas to you to do this, but the thing is that at schools and at university, they had to find that they didn't have clear protocols. So if there was an allegation, there could be months or years until the investigation was done, and nothing happened. And it was not clear either if the investigation showed that it was true, what happened to that teacher. Nothing happened usually. So it was very important because even in Chile, people started mobilizing around and got results. But there is a movement on women's rights that is even before that in Latin America, and it's called Ni Una Menos, that speaks about women who are victims of violence against women. And of course, we supported it in our country too. We even, when there was the 25th of November is the International Day Against Violence Against Women. So that's the day where we make a lot of efforts and with a lot of programs, I mean, during the whole year to try to prevent women from dying in the hands of their partners because of violence. But so, of course, the Me Too will be a very important part, but among all the women's rights issues, also to ensure, and this is very important, that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he put people to work, and we all now have at the UN a very clear protocol on how to avoid, and in case these things happen, there can be really tough sanction because we don't want any new cases to happen. And so it will be very tough, zero tolerance policy for harassment. And the other thing that's interesting here in Geneva, the treaty bodies of the Human Rights Council, and with the support of our office, is CEDAW. That's the Commission against discrimination of women's rights, in all levels of women's rights. And CEDAW has been a very important committee, treaty bodies calling the technical words, that they have been analyzing countries and giving recommendations to the whole planet, but also country by country. And they have done a fantastic work, and they work here in Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor. So, Philippa, you have a question also.
Hello, dear Ms. Bachelet. My question is, if human rights are to remain the pillars of a peaceful and equitable society, should we not add a digital component and to the Declaration of Human Rights? For example, shouldn't everyone have the right to give their prayer free, informed, time-limited, and above all, reversible consent to the use of their personal data?
Well, thank you so much. I think in my words I mentioned the risk of a digital landscape if it's not clearly regulated, if there are not laws in place in countries. Because of course sometimes you think a declaration or a convention or to expand the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and include the digital issue. I don't think that's necessary because already the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council has said that all the human rights that all the human treaties, rights that are applied to, if I may say, offline life, to all of us normally, they also apply to online. So all the systems that protect people in their daily lives should be taken into consideration on the digital area. What we need to do, though, is to ensure that, and there is a high-level panel that the Secretary General has developed, and we are working very strongly with them to ensure that all the advances in the digital area are considered the human rights implications, and we will take the measures that permit that people's rights are not affected by that. And on the other hand, we do believe that it's very important not only to have global agreements on this, we need people to have, we can have international standards. We need to work with, as I said, with the business people, so they ensure also when they're manufacturing these kind of things, or as I said, they usually they manufacture the devices, but they also are the owners of the servers. So we need to ensure how the system works in a better regulated way, but also we need the laws in place at every country to ensure the protection of people. Because as I mentioned, in some places, digital devices are used to, persecute human rights offenders. They have been able to get them, put them into jail, because they have detected them through this media. So we need to ensure that laws at country level are also adequate to protect people.
Merci, Madame Bachelet. J'ai oublié de préciser que...
Thank you, Madame Bachelet. I forgot to tell you that Philippa is also a third-year pupil at Andrés Chavan's secondary school, and she's also specializing in law and economics. Now we have two university students from the university here in Geneva. Thomas Bolthauser is the first. Thomas has studied automatics. He's now a student at the Global Studies Institute. He's in the second year of his master's degree, and he's a student in my seminar on the art and science of negotiation. We're studying North Korea and the international community this year, and we're preparing a negotiation simulation for the end of the month. Thomas, you have a question, I think? Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is this. In July 2018, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched the high-level panel on digital cooperation to strengthen cooperation among digital stakeholders. I would like to know what you think are the priorities for digital technologies, and more specifically, what do you expect from this high-level panel? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm going to answer you in English. Well, I think it's a great opportunity, this high-level panel, to sort of, on one hand, understand that we can develop technologies that can advance human progress, if I would say, and how we ensure in those new technologies that they are good for expanding medical issues or all kinds of education and so on. As a matter of fact, I was subscribed to but not I'm going to do it, to an online French lesson, so try to use it in a positive way too. So I think this is a great opportunity because the high-level panel what looks after is that, as I mentioned, to be successful in ensuring that the new technologies are positive and that have good results. It cannot be only the result of one person speaking about this. You need to put together all the stakeholders. You need to put together, of course, governments. You need to put together experts. You need to put together scientists. You need to put together the private sector. And, of course, all stakeholders like young people, civil society, etc. And this is what the high panel is representing, the opportunity of a dialogue, but with a very strong, if I would say, and that's very important, and the chair is here in Geneva, that with a very strong approach of human rights, on one hand, of course, there's no bad technologies. And I was speaking to the chair the other day, and she said, you know, let's stop talking about good technologies and bad technologies. The problem is not the technologies. The problem is people who uses the technology in a good way or in a bad way. And I think that's the important thing on the panel, that it will raise awareness, on one hand, on the opportunities, but also on the misuses that can have. But also it will find ways and tools to prevent those from happening. And for us, both are important, because for us, we think that social media, digital era, it's also a way to democratize information, access to different things. It can help education and so other things, very good things. But so our priority is to support all those technologies and all those aspects that will permit to expand people's rights and opportunities, but on the other hand, to protect people from the bad side of it.
Merci.
Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to Claire Peterson. Claire is also one of my students. She's in the second year of her master's degree at the Global Studies Institute here in Geneva. And she's also a student in my seminar. Claire.
I'm going to be in French, I apologize. En décembre 2016,
in December 2016, following a summit organized by the UN Secretary General on the topic of major movements of people around the world, the participating states adopted the New York Declaration. In doing so, they committed to developing the Global Compact on Refugees. What improvements do you think the compact makes to refugee protection? It's supposed to be adopted in December 2018. Will this be sufficient?
it was adopted, the New York Declaration on Migrants and Refugees, and it was decided to develop two global compacts, one global compact for migrants and one global compact for refugees. This year, what has happened is that, you can understand, this 193 member states. So they have been negotiating what the global compact will contain, and when it's both of them, and when it's adopted by member states. And well, it's a lot of, I'm not going to go into the bureaucratical thing because you need to have a kind of signatures and a number of signatures, so it's really active. But what has been happening all this time, we had a very important global compact on migration that had been approved by the General Assembly, but needs to be adopted and subscribed by member states in Marrakesh on a very important day, because it's the 10th of December. That is the date where we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration. Of course, it will be the 10th and the 11th on Marrakesh. There are some countries that already have said they are not going to sign it, but the majority of the countries will do. And we believe that the Global Compact on Migration is really human rights based. It will permit to countries to have a better way of dealing with migration, and to, from one hand, to understand countries' needs, but on the other hand, to respect migrants' rights. And that will happen. The final signature is, although the Global Compact was approved, but the final signature will be at the 10th of December in Marrakesh. And the Global Compact for Refugees has just been approved yesterday in the so-called third committee, one of the committees of the General Assembly. And it will have to, by the end of the year, it will be also needed to be signed by the member states. And this is a clear thing. For example, in Paris, when we did the climate change agreement on Paris, we all agree on some concepts, but we had to sign it afterwards to make it formally a reality. So I think, even though it had taken some time, because you know, it's something that sometimes for people outside of the UN, it's difficult to understand that sometimes the discussion about the wording, because that has implication. That means how states are committed or not to some things, and what will happen to them if they don't do what they're signing. So these are important negotiations that are going on, but fortunately we have advanced, and by the end of the year we'll have both of us, of both of those. And that, I hope it will mean that we'll have a better world, at least in terms of commitments, because then you have to make whatever is needed. If you need to change laws or whatever you need to do to be able to adjust to the new international agreements. I hope it will be a better world for people who are migrants because they're looking for better opportunities, or people who are refugees. And I have to say, because my family, my name is Michelle Bachelet, because my great-grandfather were from Chassagne-Montrachet. They were wine producers, and because there was this epidemic of the Xylofera, they lost all the wine production, and they had to move to South America to look for new opportunities. And so for us, and for me in particular, I think migrants contribute to the societies. They contribute with different things, with their personal experience, with diversity to a society. And society who are diverse are society who are better, in my concept. Society who have the same importance for women than men are better societies than the one who exclude a group of people. So, so I think we're going in the right direction, and then we'll have to, and everyone will have to, ensure that countries are held accountable for doing what they need to do. And that's the work of all of us, to ensure that whether the countries have signed, I hope this word doesn't mean that some countries are not going to sign, because they will be held accountable. But the thing is that I think that, that this is very important, because this is something we're living in today's era. But I have to say, we can have all the global compacts of the world. But if we don't deal with the root causes of migration, or the root causes of conflict that makes people be a refugee, we're not going to solve the issue. We need to work on development. We need to fight poverty. We need to give people opportunities and rights, because otherwise people want to save their life, want to save the life of the children, and they will migrate or they will escape to be alive in the case of refugees. So we can do this global compact, that's very important, but mainly what we need to do is to work so countries will really offer their citizens the kind of life that you in Switzerland live. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, we have a big discussion now in Switzerland about the signature around the Global Compact on Migration. Yeah, I inform you. And thank you for your words. They are convincing, and it is needed. Mesdames et messieurs, maintenant, on ouvre la discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion is now open. The question and answer period with questions from the audience. There's a microphone, a roving mic. Please wait for it. And could you please state your name? Anne Lavanchy. I'm professor at the School for Social Workers here in Geneva.
Quisiera saber si contempla y cómo contempla la colaboración del Alto Comisionado de Derechos Humanos con profesionales que podrían ayudar a la implementación de derechos humanos en comunidades. Donc la question est de savoir comment collaborer en niveau très abstrait.
The question is how the High Commission for Human Rights can work with professions which are responsible for implementing human rights, like social workers. And I have a question that I have to ask in French. I don't know if you've thought about the idea of changing the name of the High Commission on Human Rights. Maybe we could go from droits de l'homme in French, rights of man, to droits humains, human rights. Thank you.
I will answer first your last question. This is a French problem, because in English and in Spanish, it's not the name. It's human rights, derechos humanos. It's in French. When I was UN Women Executive Director and I went to France, and I asked them in Parliament, why don't you change the name? They said that the French Academy, Royal, or whatever Academy of Language, a very important one, I decided that it could not be changed, because this was history, it came with the revolution, and so on, so it could be changed. Yeah, so it's the Déclaration des droits de l'homme. So it's a pity. I tried to do it many years ago, but they told me it was not possible. But you know what happens that in my country we change some things, and we use the rights of the person, I mean, different ways to not have to say the droits de l'homme, because it's obviously, it's not very inclusive, if I may say. But the problem is in French, not in other languages, I have to say. So we could put the name outside the office in Spanish and English and so on. So, or you can try to do much more on trying to change in the French language. Anyway, we are working with the Francophonie, with the Commonwealth, with the Ibero-American, and with the Lusophonie to include other things. So I will bring to the Francophonie also that question. On your first question about how can we cooperate, I mean, there's different levels. As a matter of fact, for example, in all the treaty bodies, those are all these committees. It's not the Human Rights Council, but it's, for example, the Committee of Human Rights. We have 11 different committees, treaty bodies they're called, because they respond to some treaties that member states have signed. So that's CEDAW, that on the discrimination against women. That is, for example, the Committee of Torture, the Committee of Human Rights, etc., etc. They are conformed by experts, important lawyers, experts, the international law, etc. They're all conformed by experts, and many times we ask experts from different universities, from different parts of the world, to be part of this, to analyze. And what do? They do analysis of country situation, but also of individual allegations, who say that their rights have been not well treated. So that's one way. I mean, on the work of the office itself, in some of the areas where, or we will be calling on some areas to analyze, investigate, and have more research on some areas, that could be another possibility. But the other possibility, of course, is that the academia could, in different parts of the world, be an important, on one hand, actor on human rights education. We have seen the pushback on human rights in every part of the world, even in Europe, where I have to tell you, for us, it was like, I think we took for granted that in Europe, there were values and principles that they were there, and they will never change. But we have been seeing, as was mentioned by the ones who spoke before me, hate speech, anti-migrant, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, a lot of things that we thought we would never hear again in the history. But now we are hearing them again. And there's many reasons, and not the case now to analyze as we know why is that happening. So we need also to educate better the youth and future generations on the values and principles of human rights. Why it's not possible in the world to have peace and security without human rights, to have development without human rights. And that is why the UN has 3 key pillars: peace and security, development, and human rights. So they're all interconnected. And when we're talking about the Agenda 2030, for example, that is something also that you can support on that, is by working on the different areas, how to influence people, governments, to fulfill the task on ensuring by 2030 we leave no one behind. But also it can be through community work. I mean, it depends on the country, on how the relation with the universities are with communities. Because in some countries there are very important extension programs where you can also work on human rights in very different areas. It could be on health and education, or human rights in general. So I think there are many, many ways, and we do at the country level, we do work a lot with all the stakeholders, including, as I said, governments, non-governmental organizations, academia, students, youth organizations, etc. So it will depend on which will be the model that will be more successful.
Autre question? Oui?
Any other questions? Yes?
Je ne sais pas.
Vous n'avez toujours pas de micro?
Bonsoir.
Good evening. Here I am on the right.
Hola, soy Consuelo, soy hija de la doctora Maquiavelo y estoy trabajando en una tesis de máster sobre los derechos humanos en Chile en los colegios. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo se puede hacer para trabajar los derechos humanos, hablar de ese tema en Chile si no hay una verdad única? Y lo que en francés se llama conflit de vérité, ¿cómo le creamos el espacio a los derechos humanos en Chile sabiendo que es un tema tabú y que no lo queremos hablar en el país? ¿Cómo lo hacemos con la educación para los niños?
Well, she's asking how we do education on human rights in a country where sometimes the dialogue over the history is not always spoken by everyone. But I have to tell you, it's true, but not completely true, because in my first government, I created and I built the Museum of the Memory on the Human Rights. And there we just make a decision. We made the decision that what has happened during dictatorship in our country was so clear that we didn't need to put any interpretations, that facts, photographs, testimonies, videos, everything was so clear that everyone who will go into this museum, that is really, if you have the chance to go to Chile, go and look at it, because it's really good, really well thought and designed. And we went to many, many museums all over the world. We're here at the museum, at the part of the museum that has the ECRC. We went to Johannesburg to see the Apartheid Museum. We visited, not me, but the people I put in charge of this, visited so many museums. So we have, and there is a reality. We don't give interpretation, we put reality on it. Of course, there are people who, there are people who worked for the coup d'etat and who thought that torture was justified. You will never change their minds. But you know, my thought was, we might not change the past. We might not be able to think all the same, have the same analysis of what happened, but we have the obligation to have a common future, and we have the obligation to know what happened, to learn the lessons, And so we will never repeat that again. One of the things we do in Chile is we bring lots of people from schools to the museum because they see what happened there, and then they can have their own conclusion. I mean, not only small children, but young people. And it's incredible because the number of young people who has been going there is immense, because for many times when you have democracy, even though there's no perfect democracy, and every democracy has problems, challenges, and sometimes problems, bad problems, you know, young people take for granted things like democratic spaces, like their rights to study or the right to go to a health facility and so on. So we thought it's important that young people knows what happened in our country and what we have to do to ensure that doesn't happen again. So to tell the truth, I think you can develop educational programs that are based on facts, and the facts are clear. I mean, there was a coup d'etat. There was, at that time, a policy that understood this internal security policy, and it was international, that understood that every people who was not your friend was not your adversary, because today, if you have a personal political opinion, you can have in front of you somebody who thinks completely different, but you don't see them as the enemy. You see them as the adversary, or as somebody who thinks differently, and you respect that. Well, some people think in a so awful way it's not easy to respect, but to tell you the truth is that that there are facts there, and you can, on those facts, say this is what happened in our country. People were killed, were disappeared, where children were kidnapped, children that were refugees in Argentina, we went with the kids were kidnapped and given to families of the police at that time in Argentina. So those are facts, and we know, we have the testimony, we have the videos, and we have the history that's there, that is written, that is in film, that is in documentaries. So I think we need to, on one hand, tell the truth to the people, but also talk to the children on the new challenges of human rights. Not only on the political and civil challenges that we left, and that is very important to put it, but also explain to children why they have the right to have a good education, why they have the right to have a good health, and why they have the right to have access to clean water, to clean energy, etc., etc. And also you can do it, for example, not in a so abstract way, because one of the problems that we have when we're dealing with human rights is that people talk in a very abstract way that people don't understand what we're talking about. I mean, yes, human rights, but in concrete, how can I do something about it? And I think the Agenda 2030 with the SDGs is also a very important instrument and tool to explain not only which the rights are, but which specific targets we have on those rights, and what government should be doing to ensure people's rights. And I think that it's a very important thing what you are doing, because unfortunately, when you do this sort of service, you see that for people, human rights, because they feel, I mean, they can have not happy with everything, but in many countries, human rights are not felt today like a priority, because they have access to many things, and they're more concerned about the level of education. That's also a human right, of course, the employment, the salaries, the more, if I would say, daily basis situations. So I think it's always important, and particularly because what we have seen in the world and the trends today, that human rights are under attack, that we need to continue educating people of the importance of human rights, illustrating them with the kind of situation in one country or in many other parts of the world, what has happened, what are the roots of the conflict that have made people's rights being violated so tremendously, like we have seen in Syria, in Myanmar, or in Yemen, where according to Save the Children, 600,000 children will die this year of starvation. And I do care of political prisoners. I do care about people who have been victims of arbitrary detentions or extrajudicial killings, but I do care about those children who die because they don't have food. I really think it's terrible. Thank you.
I take one question there. Yeah. And afterwards.
Super important. Vous ne reviendrez pas.
So,
thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I want to, first of all, I want to thank University of Geneva for this space of discussion. It's really important, and I want to thank you, Mrs. Bachelet, for being here. It's been really enriching. So my name is Leticia. I'm from Brazil, so we are not actually neighbors, but we know our limits in America Latina as women. But we also know, if you allow me to say, that even with our limits, we have the law beside us. So we are able to look for the law, to look for the policeman, every trouble we have, every violence we suffer, so we can express ourselves. What I'm really concerned about is the other women around the world who has no opportunity to express themselves or to fight against the violence they suffer. And something that I keep with me is that it's we close our eyes for these women in interest of the market, you know. So I don't know if it's something that I should say out loud like this, but we allow these women to suffer this violence, to not prejudice the market, you know. So it's difficult the job of the human defenders to do their work and to help these women to fight against the system. Do you have something in your mind to work with these women, to do something to change this, you know, this situation? Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, it's there's different things here. One is the situation of women in many places of the world where they're considered like second-class citizens. They don't have the opportunities. In some parts of the world, they don't have even access to the more simple services like giving birth or have pregnant control. And so many of the children die because of that, before and after giving birth. And so I would say there's different levels of human rights violations that women have to confront. From there to, for example, in some other places all over the world, violence against women you can find all over the world, in Europe, in every region of the world. And you can have, and you have a lot of women who have been killed because of that. And you have also women who are women's rights defenders that have been killed because being women's rights defenders, or women like many women that have been defending, for example, environment or the land or indigenous that are killed because of being human rights defenders. And I would say that we do have programs. I mean, one of our main areas is to protect human rights defenders, protect journalists, because journalists are also under attack. This year in some countries, journalists are being killed in many parts of the world. Not only we saw the situation in Turkey, as we all know, but for example, in many places of Latin America and other places, journalists are killed, many in a year. And so one of the work of the office is, one of the 6 main plans is to do 2 things, to expand civic space, because one of the problems that we've seen with civil society and in many countries, even in Europe, the civic space where people can organize themselves is shrinking. Funding for NGOs is diminishing. So we need to ensure that that doesn't happen. Every time we spoke with the European Union, we speak about them. They need to continue supporting NGOs. And also we spoke about donors, how they can support NGOs or human rights defenders, women's rights defenders, etc. But we do have cooperation with other agencies of the UN whose task is to implement those. For example, in the case of women, with UN Women. So we do make common strategies to make advocacy on one hand, to speak with governments, to support civil society, to be with the civil society discussing what these kind of situations are, and that's what we're doing. And in many cases, we have a gender unit. We work with governments so they pass the laws that will protect women, that will increase their rights, or, for example, on violence, because in some countries, violence against women, if it's not on sort of daily basis, is not considered a crime. So we have been working with a lot of governments to have bigger sanctions, so violence against women is really punished. And so there's lots of different work we do on that, but with some of that we do it as an office, some with other partners. With UNICEF, we work on how we support girls so they can have access to education, how their voices are raised, and how we support the youth. So there are many different things that we do.
Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, je crois qu'on peut remercier.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should give Madame Bachelet a warm round of applause and thank her for coming out this evening.
Merci à vous aussi.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Madame la
High Commissioner for Human Rights, it's been a huge privilege to hear what you had to say this evening. And it's also a responsibility for our university. A university like ours is a space of dialogue and respect, sir, respect and dialogue, I was saying. It's a responsibility for us to ensure that all stakeholders involved in human rights, and you said this, Madame Bachelet, can meet and can advance the cause of human rights, which is so important for all the countries of the world. Thank you very much for coming this evening. There were more than 670 attendees in the room listening to Madame Bachelet, and I thank you for coming out in such great numbers.
Et si vous souhaitez...
And if you would like to end the evening with something very beautiful, you should go into the Parc des Bastions. The Right Foundation has sponsored a light show, which you can